Good evening, everyone. So today we are going to have a 15 minutes talk to the concept of diversification. And I assume that you are in your first year and we need to look at this concept briefly with the numeric examples in our real life. And now let's have a brief look at what we are going to talk in this lecture. So when we talk about diversification, there is a famous sentence we couldn't avoid of speaking of. It is said by Warren Buffett, a very famous investor in this world. And he said that do not put all of your eggs in a basket. So what does it mean? So if we assume that all of the eggs are all of the cash or all of the money you can use to invest in the portfolio, we do not want to have the situation happen that you put all of your money in one security. Why? Because when good time happens, it's okay. But when it's in the worst situation, you can find that the market goes down, your portfolio is facing a lot of losses and you cannot control it. So how we can control your risk you're facing? How we can avoid facing a lot of losses? So that's why we are going to introduce a concept which is very important, interesting concept of diversification. And in this lecture, we are going to have this 15 minutes talk in order to solve two questions. One is about why. Why shall we construct a diversified portfolio? And the other one is how. How does the diversified portfolio work under different market scenarios? Then let's first look at the first question. Why shall we construct a diversified portfolio? So when we talk about the diversified portfolio, we should first think about your target customer, because most of the time we are not only investing for ourselves, we are also investing for the customer. Suppose you are working in a bank or working in some investment department. So when we try to understand our customer, we first understand what their risk appetite is, which means that to what extent of risk they can face. Why we want to know that? That was because there was a very famous trade-off that we have to make choice. It is about the risk-return trade-off. Because we all love money, and we all expect we can get a lot of return regarding some investment project. However, we are rational and there is no free riders in the world. We should know that if we are expecting for a higher level of return, we must undertake a higher level of risk. And that makes it very important for us to understand ourselves or our customers what their risk appetite are and how much risk they can undertake. And of course, diversification helps us to control risk. And then first, let's link back to the example of Warren Buffett and to think about how diversification could help us to control risk. So if you can still remember about the eggs example, we say that we do not want to put all of the eggs in one basket. Why? Because if the basket was knocked over, the eggs will be broken. And suppose let's compare the probability of losing all of the eggs. So suppose the eggs will be broken in the basket when the basket is knocked over, and the knocked over probability is 0.2. So if we put all of our eggs in one basket, it means that once the basket is knocked over, we are going to lose our money. And what is the chance? It is 0.2. But if we put the eggs in two baskets, the chance will be lower. How? The knocked over probability for the first basket is 0.2, and the other basket is also 0.2. So the total probability of losing all of the eggs becomes 0.2 times 0.2, which is 0.04. So it means that once we could put our eggs in as many baskets as possible, we could make the probability of losing all of our eggs as lower as possible. So this is a real world example of how we can use diversification to lower or to control the risk. Now let's look at the diversification results regarding to the two market scenarios. And we are going to illustrate them in two cases. So let's look at the first example. So the first example is, in this market we have two scenarios, scenario 1 and scenario 2. And when we construct our portfolio, we are considering to use asset A and asset 2. So for asset A, in market scenario 1, the expected return is 5%. And in market scenario 2, the expected return is -1%. And for asset 2, when the scenario 1 happens, the expected return is -4%. And in scenario 2, the expected return is 8%. Now let's have a look about why we need to do the diversification. So first, if we invest in asset 1 only, it means that even though in good time or in the good market situation, we can get a 5% return, but we also are facing the probability, possible results of -1 return. And also, same case, if we put all of our money in investing in assets 2, so for assets 2, the expected return in good market situation is 8%, but for the worst scenario happen, we are going to lose our money with the expected return is -4%. So now let's look at the situation, how we can control the losses and try to make it as small as possible. So we try to combine the two assets together. So we construct a portfolio composed of asset 1 and asset 2. And also, we make the asset 1 and asset 2 equal weighted. So it means that the weights for asset 1 and the weights for asset 2 becomes half, one out of 2. So in scenario 1, so scenario 1 is this scenario, and we want to calculate what is the expected return for this portfolio. So the expected return of this portfolio, we use the weight of asset 1 times the expected return of asset 1 in scenario 1, plus the weight of asset 2 times the expected return of asset 2 in scenario 1. And 5% times 1 out of 2 plus -4% times half, and then we got the market expected return of this portfolio is 0.5%. And now let's look at the expected return of this asset, of this portfolio in scenario 2. So similarly, we use the weight of asset 1 times the expected return of asset 1 in scenario 2 plus the weight of asset 2 times the expected return of this asset in scenario 2. And we can calculate the result. The result is 3.5. So if we look at the scenario 1 and scenario 2, we can find that for this portfolio, we can make all of the expected return be positive. So it avoids of us making any losses in this situation. However, in the meanwhile, we notice that the maximum return we can obtain became smaller compared to the 8% in the asset 2. And how we did this, how we make the minimum return be a positive number, because we can observe that when we compare the scenario 1 and the scenario 2 returns among each asset, and we find that for asset 1, when scenario 1 happens, asset 1 has the higher return. But for asset 2, when scenario 2 happens, asset 2 has higher return. So it means that actually these two assets, their performance are kind of opposite with each other. So when when asset 1 performs relatively better, and asset 2 performs relatively badly. So we can call this kind of relationship of these two assets as a negative correlation. And as a result, we can see that For a negative correlated assets, we can construct a portfolio, and it's possible for us to make sure that the minimum return could be a positive number so that we can avoid of facing any losses. However, the bad point is the disadvantage of diversification is because we control the risk, we control our risk exposure. So of course, the maximum amount of return we can expect should be a smaller number as well. And now let's look at a situation 2. So situation example 2, we are still going to use the asset 1 and asset 2. However, as a little bit difference from example 1 is, for the scenario 1, the scenario 2 happens, asset 2 will have a different return. So we just swap the location of the two returns. So we make sure that when the relative good times happens for good scenario happen for asset 1, it is also the good situation for asset 2. And then if we calculate the expected return for this portfolio, we can find that the expected return of asset 1, expected return of equal weighted asset 1 and asset 2 in the scenario 1 is 0.4%, which is higher compared to the former case. And the expected return for this portfolio in scenario 2, however, it is a negative number. And actually, this case also illustrates how we can control the risk and how we are going to expect our returns in the portfolio investment regarding to the risk level, which means that if the risk is higher, we're still facing for the lower the negative return. When this risk is higher, we can also expect for the higher return. But when the risk is lower, we can expect to a lower return. And so how we construct this portfolio, since we can find that these two assets have a same direction of their performance. When asset 1 works well, asset 2 also works very well. So for this kind of correlation, we call it a positive correlation. So after we introduce the example 1 and example 2, we're going to try to draw a big picture for you to better understand how does our asset diversification works for portfolio construction. And then let's look at the big picture. So if we only invest in asset 1, in the good market scenario, we can expect a 5% return. However, in the worst market scenario, we can only expect for -1 return. And for assets 2, the good situation happens is 8% return, and for the bad situation is -4%. And if we only put our money in one of the assets, we definitely facing the risk of making losses. And how to control the risk, we want to make it smaller. So in the first situation, when we construct a portfolio with a negative correlation of the asset 1 and asset 2, we can find that we can, in the worst scenario, we still can earn 0.5% of return. However, in the good situation, our expected return is relatively lower compared to the 5 or compared to the 8% of expected return for one single asset. And for situation, the example 2 situation, that the two assets are positively correlated, which means that the performance are relatively the same direction. When the asset 1 works well, asset 2 also works well. When asset 1 works bad, asset 2 also works bad. So in the good scenario, the expected return is high, or it's higher than the portfolio in example 1. So it became 6.5%. However, we cannot totally remove all of the losses we could possibly facing. and it is still a negative number, but it's a relatively smaller number compared to the 4%. It's a minus 2.5%. So in this lecture, we have introduced the basic concept of diversification in your portfolio constructions, and we also show you why we need to do this, why we should construct a portfolio by using different assets rather than only one. And we also show you two different situations that we compose the portfolio by using two assets. And actually you can find that the portfolio, the diversification results is not only determined by each asset's return or risk, it also determined by the correlation between the assets in the portfolio. So in your later years course in investment, we are going to talk more about how to measure your risk, how to measure your return, and we are going to calculate the standard deviation of your portfolio or some other situations that happens in the correlation case, and we are going to look more in your later year study. So after today's study, you could have a brief picture on how and why the diversification works. And also, remember one suggestion by Warren Buffett is do not put all of eggs in one basket. Thank you.